We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet to share these conversations on the Vegan Compass podcast.
We extend our respect to elders past and present, as well as any of our listeners and guests. Hello and welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change. We are your hosts, Ric and Mackenzie Cross.
From wherever you're listening, please be sure to like and subscribe to support this podcast. Now to the episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Vegan Compass podcast. You're listening to Ric Allport and Mackenzie Cross, and today we have Ayanthi De Silva joining us as our guest.
So, Ayanthi, who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name is Ayanthi. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I am a psychologist. I've been practicing as a psych for the past 5 years. And before I got my registration, I've been working in mental health for quite some years as well. So previously, I used to be a support worker. And I worked for a service that helped people with pretty difficult, complex mental health issues transition out of psychiatric facilities back into community, into transitional housing. So yeah, the work that I used to do was very hands-on, kind of helping people develop their independent living skills. It was kind of like driving around doing house visits, making Centrelink visits, going to Housing New South Wales. It was a lot of advocacy work. But always on your feet. And yeah, I feel like I got really thrown into the deep end with that job. It was my first, proper adult job out of uni. And yeah, it was very eye-opening kind of seeing the diversity of, a very vulnerable population with very little personal supports of their own, hence why they had to come into a service like ours. So yeah, it was interesting because it ended up kind of being very based on relationship building. You would become basically like a professional friend or a professional family member to a lot of the clients that we worked with. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was fascinating work.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And how did you then move from that into practicing as a psychologist and then, I guess, integrating that with the animal rights space?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that they were just sort of parallel to each other. It's not like one was meant to prop up the other or vice versa. I studied psychology in my undergrad, and yeah, it's interesting because I don't think a whole lot of people who go into a psych degree end up coming out as psychologists, because it's a long-winded pathway. It takes minimum 6 years, and there's a lot of obstacles that I think end up being detractors for a lot of people, so they kind of fall off the bandwagon and go sort of find another path. So you've got to be really stubborn in continuing to go past all of the, I guess, the red tape or all of the, the necessary requirements, the criteria that you have to meet. So,
How long was the course?
The undergrad course is 4 years, and then you have to do a master's as well to get your registration.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did my undergrad in Newcastle and my master's here at Macquarie. And yeah, once I got my general registration, that's when I decided to resign from my old job, which I was at for 6 years, so that support worker role. Yeah, it was a big formative part of my life, but then resigned, took a break just to kind of recalibrate, and then started applying for actual psychology jobs, which was very daunting as well because, again, the work that I was previously doing, like I said, was very hands-on. It was like being a buddy for these people versus, now I'm going to be entering into one-on-one time with clients. Yeah, doing actual therapy with individuals, which is, of course, a lot more structured and working with a radically different type of clientele. So mostly the people that I would work with now are, you could call them kind of, quote, the unwell well. So usually, people who have professions, they are generally well connected, have a social network, but are still dealing with lots of issues like depression, anxiety, panic disorder, OCD, even self-esteem issues, just relationship difficulties. That's probably the big chunk of what I see now. And then occasionally I'll see still clients with maybe a more similar presentation to what I used to see. So people with psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar. But they're certainly the more rare type of clients I see now.
Now, before we get on to our next question, you might remember that you wrote the foreword for my book.
Yes, I did indeed.
Yes, very.
Nice to see it's a physical copy.
Yeah, very, very, like so touched, and you did such a wonderful job.
Yeah, thank
but
you.
today, just wanted to give you that. That's your copy.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much.
Oh, that's wonderful. I wasn't expecting it to be such like a nice big book. I think this feels more appealing and easier to read.
Yeah, well, I decided to keep it bigger, and in the book itself, I've given people places that they can write in, make notes, so it's like a journal.
Yeah.
And and there's inspirational quotes in there, and some sayings. So just trying to get people motivated, recover from the mental trauma that I went through.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have a bit of a hesitation when I was in the midst of writing that forward, because I realized, because the forward is basically kind of like a recount. It's kind of giving you a kind of a first-person view of what it's like to be an undercover investigator. And I remember writing it being like, oh, is this a bit too much? Is this potentially actually going to be re-traumatizing? And I think it potentially could, so hopefully the rest of the book will help with that. But I think it was really important to, kind of weave a real visual tapestry of what the experience is actually like.
Well, it's a really moving forward. No, every time I read it, I get chills, because it does take me back to a lot of the things that I've seen and witnessed, but it does lead beautifully into the book. And you do end it on a positive note, and it's really good. It's a beautiful forward. So thank you so much. That's for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Well, I was just going to say, it would be great to actually build some kind of a workshop based on the content of the book.
Yeah, well, that would be something that I'd love to look into doing, because we, as activists, we don't have anywhere to go. Yeah. And we burn out. And that's why the whole purpose of the book, but yes, doing something like a workshop where we could actually work through stuff for people who are burning out would be a really good thing to do. Yeah. So,
one day.
How did you get into activism?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I dabbled in activism in my pre-vegan days. I think as soon as I started comprehending the whole subject matter of animal exploitation and the evils that are committed against them, which was when I was a teenager. This is very random, but for a Year 9 computer studies assignment where we had to build up a website on any topic that we wanted, for some reason I randomly chose animal cruelty. And I think that was more a generalized curiosity in the morbid, which I've always had and kind of across the board. So for this I chose animal cruelty, and I remember Googling, researching fur farming in China, and whatever imagery I saw there obviously really stuck out to me. And so I guess that was like a big load of seeds, I think, going to the concept of seed planting. And then obviously being kind of conscious of this reality of, the way that a lot of animals exist on Earth is through being this exploitable, commodified object, which means humans basically do whatever the hell they want to them. Obviously really stuck in my mind, and I came to learn of other ways in which that violence is perpetrated against them. So I remember I went vegetarian when I was 16 after watching a live export documentary. But even then, it was years prior to that I had wanted to go vegetarian. And I have a diary from my teen years. I was about 16 years old, and I've written in there, last month I decided to go vegetarian, but I really want to go vegan. Wow. And it bewilders me, because that was back in 2006, and I'm not even quite sure where I had come across the word vegan. What had I read? What had I seen back, way back then? Because nothing really sticks out to me of like, oh, where would I have come across the concept? Anyway, so I had an intention set from back when I was 16 years old, which obviously meant that I knew enough about the idea, the philosophy, that I had this conviction that one day I need to actually live this. And I would, I guess, do my own forms of at-home activism in kind of trivial ways. Like I remember when my parents bought a new leather couch, I would refuse to sit on it. I still haven't sat on this leather couch that I bought when I was a teenager. And I remember asking my mum, why would you choose to buy furniture made out of murder victim? Why would you use their skin? And again, funny, right? Because I was still consuming dairy and eggs and whatever else.
I can relate to this a lot.
Yeah.
My dad used to ask me to go fishing with him, and I would go only so that I could throw the fish back in the water.
Wow, so you're an animal liberator from way back when. Yeah, gosh. Yeah, it's fascinating how these little moments in our childhoods, shows that there was, I guess, a deep enough sense of self and how we related to the world, and how that we've like just really carried on with that. Because you wonder how many other children, adolescents have also had that proclivity, but it's just been stomped out of them.
Yeah, so sad to think about.
Yeah, and then they become the people that we have a real hard time with out on the street.
Yeah.
But this is the thing though, because you two have grown up in a society where things are starting to get a little bit more understood. I grew up with sport, and all they did was say you've got to eat meat every single meal, because I was playing sport at a reasonably high level.
Yeah.
And they said you have to have your protein, so they just kept feeding you meat every morning. Breakfast, lunch, dinner was meat.
Yeah.
And it was horrible. Like I think back to it now, and I just go, my God, it's just so crazy to think that that's what they thought.
Yeah.
But that's what they were led to believe. And as I always say, one of the horribly most successful advertising campaigns was feed the man meat.
Yeah.
And all the men went, yeah, that's what we got to do. We got to eat meat. It stuck. And it's stuck all these years.
It's just advertising, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's marketing.
Well, of course, the meat industry took over from the tobacco industry. So once tobacco was gone, the meat industry just sort of slid on in. Same with dairy. So yeah, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that becomes common knowledge, or what is purported to be common knowledge, just because it's fed to you at a young age, as in this information or incorrect information is fed to you at a wrong age. It's just a given that it must be true.
Yeah.
And then it's just continued to.
So how did your family take your decision to go vegetarian then vegan? Because obviously with your cultural upbringing, that would have been a difficult situation probably.
Yeah, well, when I went vegetarian overnight, it kind of was a big deal because my parents weren't happy about it. They were concerned, again, health reasons. And so my mum would always, bless her, prepare a lunch for me after school. And you would just be an assortment of dishes. And I remember one time it was fried rice, and she had torn up the bits of chicken into tiny little micro pieces, thinking that I wouldn't notice and that I would just gobble it up. But me being as stubborn as I am, I did notice, and I picked them out individually.
Yep.
And then I ate it. So yeah, I think it was seen as kind of a rebellious thing, but eventually they embraced it. They knew that I was very, I wasn't going to change. I was very stuck on the idea that I had my reasons for changing my behavior in that way, and that wasn't going to change. And so, yeah. And then it's interesting because I remember it almost being like a point of pride, like when we would be invited out for dinners at family friends' places. The way my parents would say, "Oh, I know Ayanthi, our daughter, is a vegetarian." And I think there was this, I don't know, this is my interpretation in hindsight, but maybe this sense of vicarious, like, oh, look at this good deed. Because I was raised from a Buddhist background, and really, according to the scriptures, it's very in alignment with veganism.
Yeah.
But of course, as with most religions, people cherry pick and don't really embody a lot of the philosophies in their religion of choice. And that was certainly the case with the religion that I grew up in. So we would go to the temple and they would have like a completely plant-based spread when we're doing, it's like an offering for the sadhus. And then we would be coming back home eating chicken curry, and it didn't make any sense. And any time I pulled my parents up on this, it's so fascinating because it's the same type of argumentation that you see by like trolls, like 13-year-olds. We've always been doing it. Yeah. It doesn't actually matter. Just don't think about it, you know. So, but yeah, I think that hypocrisy in the adults around me really, I just found it so unappealing and like gross. And so I think, if anything, that just further cemented my stance because I didn't want to be like them.
I can understand from that experience how you've then become a psychologist, because there's that part of you that just wants to try and understand how people can say one thing and do another.
Yeah. You want to make sense of it.
Yeah.
It's hard to make sense of.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, you, I guess coming face to face with these challenges, especially when you can't relate to when what in your eyes are really poor reasons to be acting out in a particular way. You want to at least try to understand why. Yeah.
This leads me to the point of...
Oh, actually, there's more that I could say there.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
So I will say as well, so that was my background. I had, like I said, set this intention on becoming vegan at 16, but I was vegetarian, and it's one of those things that I just procrastinated on for a really, really, really long time. And I don't know what kind of shifted. I think it was probably a few different things, but at some point I think I just remembered that, this animal thing is like something that used to be important to me and that I used to really be invested in. I went to bull riding protests and live export protests when I was a teenager, or in my very, very early 20s, back when I was in uni. And then I think it just kind of faded out into the background. But then whether it was my internet algorithm doing something and I started to see more vegan content online, this is around 2017, I guess. I remember walking past a cube once at Pitt Street Mall in Sydney City, and I didn't really engage. I took a flyer and I kind of scurried off, being like, oh no, like I am on your side, but obviously not actually, because I hadn't gone vegan yet. But then, I found out about this documentary called Dominion. I decided to go to a screening in the city, and then, that was 2018. So, signed up for a 30-day challenge, and kind of the rest is history. And then decided, because I felt so compelled after what I had just seen, that, okay, I can't just live vegan. I need to be active. I need to do more. So there was a 12-year journey, far too slow journey between the initial intention and then it actually happening.
But I think we can all relate to that, because it's very rare that somebody just goes vegan straight overnight.
Yeah.
You know, they do have a process. I mean, I was vegetarian likewise for probably 10 years before somebody showed me the horrors of dairy. And I realized that I was eating cheese when I'd go to a friend's place and I would have like the skerrick of milk in my coffee. And that was it. And I went, I don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, that's ridiculous. So, I just cut it out and went. So that's been probably about 20 years now.
Wow.
And, lo and behold, I'm still here and, haven't died from lack of protein or any of that stuff.
Thriving.
Oh, yeah. Well, probably thriving too much, but, working on that. So you got yourself into activism. How did you, where were your first sort of walking into activism? What did you start doing when you decided you went vegan and wanted to be an activist?
Yeah, well, I suppose it was the main form of activism that was happening at that time, which were the cubes. And I was very, very nervous with the idea of that. In fact, actually, I don't think it was until a year later. Yeah, because I remember when I went to the Animal Rights March in 2018 before I went to see the Dominion screening. And then I think it took another year to actually start going to activist events consistently. And I was very nervous. I just kind of started showing up and just handing out flyers or just holding the TV. I hated the idea of, actually talking to people. Yeah. But I was really welcomed in. It was Marcus who was running SOS at the time, who really welcomed me in. And I remember Pavel, I don't know if you know.
Yeah,
Pavel?
I know of Pavel.
Yeah, he's been at it for a really, really long time. He's probably one of the most consistent activists that I know. He's been, going at it for years, every single week. It's amazing. And yeah, he was just so kind and warm, and it really makes a difference when someone goes out of their way when they notice a new face and like just introduces themselves and helps you to feel a bit more comfortable and at ease and encourages you. So he was the one that encouraged me as well, I think, to start having a bit of a chat here and there. So that's how it started for me, and I was very consistent. I went every single week, sometimes twice a week, to those cubes. Again, I didn't feel like a very confident outreacher, so I think I had a nice balance between, holding the TV or flyering or, occasionally also having outreach conversations. But I feel like I went really hard for a good, maybe two years and a bit.
So I'm really curious to ask about your perception or perspective, I guess, of using graphic animal cruelty footage, just from like a psychology perspective, because it's really interesting that many people seem to have different responses to it. Some people, it propels them to be vegan, and others it kind of triggers them to walk away and have a very opposing response to it.
Yeah, you are correct that it's like the full spectrum of reactions to it. Personally, I am all for it. I think it's important. If anything, I think it's paramount to the advocacy work that we do, because it is an actual visual representation. It is evidence of what the message and the information that we're trying to deliver. And I think having a visual representation, both photography and videography, is important. I think there's a big difference between hearing a description of how something works versus being able to actually witness it with your own eyes. I suppose in saying that, though, graphic imagery in and of itself, I guess, isn't necessarily adequate to compel, further introspection and behavior change. Because exactly as you said, graphic imagery is just so intense, and the whole, out of sight, out of mind that people very much rely on. I guess the starkness of just how horrible and evil it is, if anything, can kind of reinforce that need to shut down and just dissociate. There's a writer who I really am quite fond of on Instagram. She actually doesn't do, her focus is not animal rights, but she has been talking a little bit more about animal rights and veganism, and she describes it as a collective dissociation. And I think she puts it really well, because I think that's exactly what it is. And due to just how much pain fully recognizing this reality can conjure up in you, I think people just aren't ready to face that reality, and so they would rather numb themselves and disconnect from it. So in saying that, where graphic imagery, I think, is effective is when it's paired with certain other things. And I actually did found a study that kind of backed this up. So this was a study from 2020 by Fernandez. It's from a study titled Images That Liberate, Moral Shock and the Strategic Visual Communication in Animal Liberation Activism. And basically what they argue is that where graphic imagery is most effective is when the shock is balanced with consent. And I think that's really interesting, because that's one thing we didn't have in the cubes, where we were just holding the TVs and people are just, walking by. And if they turn their heads that way, that's what they're going to be confronted with. Whereas what the main mode of street activism that's happening in Sydney now is by an organisation called We the Free. And they have a slightly different format. They're still showing the footage, but this time it's all kind of obscured. It's behind, it's kind of like a barricade, and the signs that they're holding are very ambiguous. It just says, watch a 3-minute video for free food. And so there is kind of a consent verbal consent exchange happening when someone's like curious and they're like, oh, what are you showing? You know, the outreacher will disclose a little bit of like, oh, this is about how your food is made, or it's about animal agriculture.
Yep.
So I wonder if that's a part of why this type of demo is as, I guess, effective as it is, and why they continue to run it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, the consent
Because yes,
point.
we've all done Cube
Yep.
and had those confronting conversations.
Yeah.
And I've done a couple of those that are similar to what you've just described.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it until you just brought it up then, that, there is a consent to view,
Yeah.
and giving people that right to say yes or no is an interesting point.
I think that itself can be a bit of like rapport building, right? Like it's you're basically, I feel like you're
establishing a relationship.
Yeah, yeah. There's a kind of it's like I respect you enough to tell you what this is going to be. Like fair warning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it actually has covered a question I was going to ask about. How has your work as a psychologist influenced your activism? But I think you've pretty much covered all that.
Yeah, there's more that I could add there. But let me keep going down these points, because there's more that came out of this study. So another point they said is, again, referring to graphic imagery, is that the discomfort must be balanced with direction, because that makes perfect sense, right? You just seeing a shocking image isn't necessarily going to be enough to compel any change. Like, 'cause you might not understand even what's going on. So, and I think this is what we do pretty well in most forms of demos. There's flyers, there's extra information, there's conversations that are had. So I feel like that is the direction.
To help people make the next steps of going vegan.
Yeah, and understanding there is a thing that you can actually do about this. You have accountability and autonomy here. Another point they brought up was that the realism of the graphic imagery must be balanced with hope. And the way that they spoke about this in the study was actually more specific to activists who for themselves use graphic imagery to remind themselves of why they're doing what they're doing, especially when they feel really fatigued or dissociated themselves. And so they talked about how important it is for us for our own retention to be bearing witness to hope instilling stories and experiences.
But then how do you balance that with, as you know, the mental health aspect for activists, and when they burn out or they're starting to burn out, which I didn't understand. I just kept going thinking, everything's going to be fine. I'll get to the other side, be peachy keen. It didn't happen. So how can we balance that as activists to make sure we're getting time out, still know the graphic imagery, still actually have to witness it, but then be able to turn our minds off it because we know it's happening 24 hours a day?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a big question, such an important question for, the sustainability of us as individuals, as activists, but for the longevity of the movement itself, right? Because it's we who carry it. I think there's a lot that we need to be really on top of there. Like, of course, your basic self-care practices, like making sure that you're eating nutritious meals and that you're getting your blood tests done to see if anything needs to be sorted out there, that you're sleeping well through the night. I think, beyond the kind of basic things, I think we need to also be really conscious of, because I think especially for new activists who get into it, there's fire in our bellies. We're so intense. It really filters the way we see reality. I think a lot of us can become very, very misanthropic. And so it's so important that you have a life outside of your activism, and that there are things in your life, other hobbies, other passions, other connections with other people, your job, whatever it may be, that you have things that bring you meaning and a sense of purpose outside of this, because it's just too easy for this to be everything.
Yep, I've been there.
Yeah, it just takes over your life, and you just go, I can't do anything else. I have to do activism all the time, and I can't find joy. But this is the thing: everybody needs to find joy.
Yeah.
And I think what people need to realise is they don't have to do activism 24/7. They can not show up to some events because they just need time out and they need time for themselves. And I think that's what people forget.
Yeah. Be selective about what you choose to do.
It's definitely easier said than done, though, because from my personal experience, for a long time, I kind of carried this thought of, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? And I think because I was living in North Queensland at the time, and we had a much smaller vegan community, and some of the street activism and other forms of activism kind of started falling away. And I felt like I was one of the only few left that was still advocating for animals. That, it was really hard to take a break, because I felt like no one else was going to step up.
Yeah, that's really, really challenging. I think it's really important to, I suppose, refine what certain forms of activism need to involve versus other forms of activism. So I would imagine that, let's say you wanted to run something like a cube, or you've got some kind of setup and you're showing footage. I would argue that type of setup is something that requires at least a good handful of people. So if you've only got 2 people on board who can do it, I would encourage those 2 people to decide to hold rain check that.
Think about another way that they could do some activism.
Maybe spend that day instead just doing some stickering or chalking, and wait till you've rallied up maybe 5 or 6 people at least who can commit to it, and just postpone it till then.
Well, it's good that you mentioned there are other forms of activism. We don't only have to do things like cubes or, holding screens, whichever way you want to look at it, because you've mentioned chalking, which is great, stickering, which is great, even just talking to people. So there's all the different levels of activism. We don't always have to do those full-on outreach things, although I like doing them. But, you do have to take a step back sometimes. It's too much.
Yeah. It's way too much, And even though it kind of fulfills that burning desire, like, I get to feel like I'm doing, the thing to facilitate my passion, and I'm not slacking off, and, this is me, acting on my conviction. If that is the thing that leads you to burnout sooner, then is that actually helpful?
Exactly. It can become an addiction.
There's a lot of intense emotions that come with it. And it can kind of get, like, I guess when you're having a period of steadiness or relaxation, then there can be guilt associated with that. And it's just like, it's a horrible way to end up.
Yeah, definitely. So we have sort of started covering this topic. I wanted to ask specifically, what kind of mental health concerns do activists face? We've already touched on burnout, but what other things are common among vegans and animal advocates?
I think there's quite a myriad of mental health concerns, like burnout being the major one, and what we've just talked about. So burnout being, when you've just gone hard for so long that you're basically experiencing depression because of the intensity of work that you've been putting in, plus the output isn't matching up to the input. So you start to become really skeptical of what it is that you're even doing, or for what purpose it's for, especially in this movement. I think that's very common, because again, we're up against billion-dollar industries, and we really are alienated, being sort of change makers in this movement. So change is very, very, very slow. If there's change at all, it's very incremental, or it'll be really patchy. And so that skepticism about the actual impact that you're making is kind of inevitable. You're going to feel like that. So I think burnout is a huge one. Misanthropy, as I mentioned, that's not necessarily a mental health concern per se, but it's certainly a thing that can impact your mental health. It can really get in the way of you, caring at all about humanity, the oppressors, and just connecting with other people, connecting with pre-existing people in your life. Of course, depression, PTSD, obviously a big one. There's so much, I guess, primary trauma itself based on what it is that we are involved with, but even just being someone who doesn't do direct action, the vicarious trauma that you develop just from witnessing what the animals experience. Anxiety, of course, even like the social anxiety, like it would be very difficult if you had pre-existing social anxiety. And I can also imagine how social anxiety could kind of emerge from different types of activism. Loneliness, again, because of the aforementioned feelings of alienation and disconnect. There's also, again, these aren't necessarily diagnostic kind of concerns, but there are certain traits that we call schemas. It's kind of like a filter by which you see the world due to your early childhood, formative experiences that, can really skew the way that you see yourself or the way that you interact with the world around you. And I'm sure there are certain schemas that activists probably are more prone to having. And it's interesting because it's sort of like the chicken or the egg thing of like, is it the activism that can perhaps create or exaggerate certain schemas, or is it the schemas that brought you into activism?
Right.
So one example of that is unrelenting standards, just having super, super high expectations of yourself, perfectionism, and a deep sense of responsibility in having to achieve.
Stop describing me. I'm like,
You always want to walk away going, I fixed everything. Everything's fine. The world is really peachy keen. And then you turn around and you realize that it's not. And, you might have maybe got one person interested in your outreach and given them a flyer and they've gone, I'll think about this seriously. But then you wonder sometimes if they just walk away and screw it up and put it in the bin. Yeah. So we don't have any, definable points where we can say, yes, I've managed to turn so many people vegan. We just have to hope.
So immeasurable.
Yeah.
I think something that helped me to overcome that was just thinking about what's within my control. Yeah. And I can only control that conversation that I had with that person. I can't control if they turn around the corner and scrunch up the flyer and throw it in the bin.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so helpful to, kind of be aware of your own agenda and change your own agenda if necessary. Because if your agenda is, I want to have this conversation with this one person and convince them to go vegan. Oh my gosh, like what are you setting yourself up for? Like such massive disappointment. And I'm sure it would feed into all those mental health concerns. So there's perhaps people have heard of this model. It's called the Stages of Change model. And it's used as kind of just like a framework for any kind of behavioral change, like quitting smoking or whatever, losing weight, whatever it might be. But I think it's really handy because it helps you to identify where someone may be within that framework. So it goes from pre-contemplation, where you've never even considered this thing, the thought has never even entered into your mind, to contemplation, where you're like aware of this thing and you're considering it, you're thinking about it, to oh gosh, I forgot the third one. It's preparation, where you've basically decided you want to change and you're putting in the work to kind of, or resource yourself in order to do that. Then there's the action, then there's maintenance, potentially there's relapse, and then you kind of start from the top. So just acknowledging that you don't know where someone's going to be at in this stages of change model when they come up to have a conversation with you. So I like the idea of if your agenda can change from, I need to make this person vegan, meaning you might be trying to force someone from pre-contemplation all the way around to action. That's a big ask for yourself. To perhaps, if I can move someone from pre-contemplation to contemplation, then I think that's a win. Yeah. Just in terms of, that one conversation. And I think that's why it's important to be really clear with what the vegan message is, because then you've kind of, as you said, Mackenzie, you kind of have done your part. And if there's any kind of shift from one stage to another, then how amazing is that?
Yeah. I guess another way to look at it is like from a marketing perspective, in terms of like touch points. So when you're trying to sell something to someone, you generally need multiple touch points before they actually decide to purchase a product.
Yeah.
So I like to think of veganism as the same thing. It's pretty similar to how you just described it, but every conversation or positive association that they have with veganism, whether it be a good meal or a conversation with an activist or a billboard or something, it's another touch point that kind of combines all the pieces of the puzzle together in the end.
Yeah, it's lots of analogies for it. It's the seed planting.
Yes.
So, yeah. I think it's a really helpful way to see it, especially coming back to, you know, what the original definition of veganism even is about. Before it's an action, it's a psychological shift, right? It's you no longer view animals as commodities. They're no longer slaves. And I think that starts in the mind. And I think that's why it's important to make that really clear, because when someone has the why and then they understand that, then the behavior will follow eventually when the conviction is there.
That's really true.
So you've done a number of different types of activism.
Mm-hmm.
You were also instrumental in bringing the lingerie protest to Sydney and possibly Australia even. How did that come about? And how are you finding it? Because I've seen a lot of great response. So how do you find, as being a person involved in that, how are you finding it and how did it come about?
Yeah. Well, I can't take credit for bringing it to Australia because it was Tash Peterson and Stefania Ferrario, I think that's how you say your name, who first did this in the streets of Melbourne back in 2021, I think it was. And I remember seeing the photos pop up on my Instagram feed and being like, oh, wow, this is like radically different to anything that we've seen before. And there was such like a fun cheekiness to it that I was really drawn to. Like, this is so different to, anything that I've seen before.
Can you maybe describe what the lingerie protests are for anyone who's not in Melbourne or Sydney? They might not have seen it before.
Sure. So the lingerie protest is an animal rights demo which consists of models being like anyone, any vegan outreach, any vegan activist, in their lingerie or underwear in the street holding signs portraying a vegan or animal rights message. And the original source of this was Tash and Stefania, who their signs were, I think, a bit more on the cheeky side.
Yep.
Eat pussy, not animals. We only fuck vegans, etc. But they still had some, watch Dominion.
Yep.
There were still animal rights messages there. So I was chatting with my friend Alicia on Instagram, being like, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And I was kind of being quite sarcastic about when she brought it to me. How about we just do this in Sydney? Like, would you be down? And I think I was like, I don't think I actually would, but it's a funny idea. Until the conversation just kept going until it became a plan, and we had put in a notice of assembly to the police. We had rallied up some fellow activists who were interested, and that's kind of how it happened. But the thing that was really important for me, I guess, with my own ideas of what was going to actually make this effective and worth doing, was to make sure that we had very strong direct animal rights messages. We had one or two kind of the cheeky-esque signs, but I think it was very important, with, of course, the criticism that would come our way, to make sure that the message was clear, because, there's a lot of opinions that we get that this was, we're getting paid for this, or that we're hired models, or that this is just to show off and blah, 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 blah. And so...
Wouldn't we all like to be paid by Big Vegan?
I know.
Big Vegan, give us the money. We've done so much.
If only. And I
just want to make the point that the lingerie underwear activism is open to all genders. So it's not just females. It's all genders who can be there.
And that was also extremely important for me too, because I certainly did not want this just to be a women in lingerie thing. So the vast majority of the demos that we did in Sydney, we always had men at them. I think there were a few that maybe didn't, and I think that's because we had low numbers in general, but we always had a collection of men who were, absolutely willing and able, and would consistently show up. So it's never been a thing of this is us exploiting women, which is a very silly, to me, an unfair criticism, because it really, I think, diminishes personal autonomy.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's just a lot of sex negativity in general, and this is so, I think, detached from actual anything sexual. The models are literally either standing up or walking, and they just happen to be wearing underwear. In the same way.
And on a beach, you have people wearing less on a beach than what you're wearing
100%.
in the protests. So.
You walk through anywhere, the shopping centre, you walk through the bus billboard ads, and there's going to be models wearing underwear, bras and things of Victoria's Secret, whatever it is. Like it's really.
It's there.
I think
public.
I don't think it's a sexual thing at all, and I think it's very. I don't know. I get really defensive. Like standing up holding a sign is really not sexual.
No.
Even if you're in your knickers.
Love it.
But no, it's a really powerful protest. So you've pretty much did you get a lot of negativity from people walking past, or have you had a lot of positive feedback? Because I've seen a lot of the interaction, and it's all from majority of what I've seen is really quite positive.
Yeah, I mean, you get the whole gamut. Like it's such a mix. You'll get the criticism of, why are you doing this? What's this got to do with animal rights? And we always have an explanation. Like if someone is genuinely curious, we will offer the explanation, which is just that we're using a gimmick. It's novelty, right? Just seeing someone in their underwear to draw attention to what we're actually trying to draw attention to, and hence the strong animal rights messages. We always had outreaches flyering at all of the Sydney demos. I don't know if that was the case across the world with other demos that have happened. But yeah, we had a very definitive criteria of what we wanted to have for the demos in Sydney. So yeah, we had those criticisms, but we had plenty of people come and compliment us and you go girls or you go guys and thank yous. And we've had activists who are activists now because they were just a vegan passerby. And they were like, wow, what's this? I want to know more about it. So I think that's really quite incredible. And I will say this is my anecdotal opinion, but I would say by far the lingerie protests have been the most photographed by passerbys. You know, over the 20-something demos that we ran, it was always like people with their phones out taking shots. So I think that's pretty neat.
That's the thing, that they'll go away and look at the photographs.
Yeah, they're taking photos of us. They're taking photos of animal rights.
The signs are there, so that they can't get away from the message that you're bringing across.
And we would always have signs saying watch Dominion on YouTube or don't watch.org, so there would be something to follow up with. So I think we were really quite mindful of how we put that together.
You've mentioned a few of the mental health concerns that are quite common among vegans and activists. What do you think are some of the strategies that people can implement when they're feeling this way so that they can sort of come through the other side, maybe take a break, reassess, and be in it for the long haul?
Yeah, plenty of things. I think kind of, as you said, firstly, acknowledging that you are allowed to take a break, like you have full permission to do that. And I think we all need to hold ourselves accountable to that, because I think there's a lot of power in witnessing someone else do something that kind of helps you to give yourself permission to do it as well. Like I said, have things going on for you outside of activism. Make sure that you're making friends, even if it's just a small few. It's so important to be able to, I guess, have an antidote for the intense alienation that we can feel. Play to your strengths. So kind of circling back to what we were saying about activism doesn't have to come in one format. And just because it's the more popular format, that doesn't mean that you're obliged to do something in that way. I like this idea of passive activism. So things that don't require you to have a conversation ever at all. Social media, my gosh, there's so much reach that you can potentially have through Instagram and TikTok. Just comments. Something that I like to do is when a random post comes up on Instagram that isn't necessarily a vegan related one, but there's some reference to an animal in it, or it's a cooking video and they're just eating some kind of animal, I'll make some kind of reference to it. So I'll be like, oh, click here to see what happened to the chicken first. Don't watch.org with a little emoji. Just something that you can kind of throw that takes such little sweat off your back that, someone might actually look into. And something that doesn't involve you having to engage in any sort of back and forth either.
Yeah.
Because online debates can be incredibly tedious, and I have to really stop myself from engaging in that. So finding ways that are pretty low energy, low cost to you that you can still do.
Yeah, I like that.
And there's plenty of ways to do that.
I was going to say as well, like, this is just more of a public service announcement to all the vegan activists out there. Let's all do our part to make vegans feel safe to take a break and take a step back. Yeah. Let's not guilt anyone into feeling like they always need to be there. Yeah. Let's respect the fact that people do need to set boundaries for their own mental health. It doesn't make them any less vegan or any less effective as an activist, and the movement is going to be stronger for the long haul if people can take a break when they need it without feeling pressure from other people. Yeah.
I think also we should look at doing more of the vegans just getting together to be vegan. Having some nice vegan outings, and you might have an outreach. At the end of the outreach, go away. Like I've seen some of your stuff where you go away and you have a meal together, and you basically just bring yourselves back down. You chat, you laugh, you might
debrief.
Poke fun at some, you
love a good debrief.
You poke fun at some of the people that you've had arguments with, but it gives you that sense of joy walking out rather than walking away from an activism event, which happens quite often. People will walk away straight after an event, no debrief. They're all hyped up and they're all feeling quite, mad and agitated. And they go home, they're not going to sleep, they're not going to eat because they're so agitated. So I think as vegans, we need to look after each other and have more vegan outings and support more vegan outreach, or even things like we've got the World Vegan Day coming up. Getting out, well, depends on when this podcast gets out. We might have had World Vegan Day, but get out, support these events that are really positive events that give you that energy, that joy back that we lose when we do too much outreach.
Yeah, perfectly put. Yeah, because that's what, again, makes this movement sustainable. And I like this idea of for all the kind of the damages and the hits that we take, what's the antidote to that? So disconnect, connect.
Yeah.
Deep feelings of sorrow and pessimism. What can you connect with that instills you with a sense of hopefulness? We're being really mindful that there's a kind of an opposite reaction that you can be really intentional about for every hit, for lack of a better word.
But I think also to be aware of the people who come into your activism circle, to especially for longer term activists, to be looking out for some of the new people. And just make sure that they are taking stock of themselves. They aren't just going hell for leather, because I know when I first got into activism, I was into everything. It's like I'm there at every single thing, and just again that led to burnout because nobody looked after people. Nobody looked out for the other people and said, hey, maybe take a bit of a break, or go and just go and have a drink somewhere, quiet drink, and then come back. So I think we need to look out for new people and look out for each other.
100%. I think that's pivotal as well. And I think by even you asking such a question, again, there's permission in that. Like, I'm asking you because you're allowed to feel shit about this. You're allowed to feel really off-put or tired or demoralized and demotivated. So I completely concur. We need to kind of model that ourselves and hold ourselves accountable.
Where do you think activism is going to go? How do you see it as evolving from here? Because we took a big knock in COVID. And unfortunately we had quite a split in the vegan activism movement, which did create a lot of damage. I don't see that it's really starting to pick up as quickly as I'd like it. And it's been 4 years now.
Yeah.
So how do we see activism evolving from this point? Do we see it recovering and getting back to its heyday when, there was lots of people out there?
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, how definitely COVID broke the kind of the habitual routine, I think, that people had really established during that time of like every single week or on whatever evening that they showed up, they continued to show up. And then, of course, that really was a big disruption. But yeah, I also wonder if part of the reason that perhaps the street activism hasn't picked up in the same way is have people actually diversified perhaps in their own ways? More time and energy spent on the social media side of activism, because there's so much more kind of reach potentially that you can have if you really kind of tailor your advocacy to suit, I guess, that style, and again play into the algorithm. I think, again, like for example, Tash Peterson, I think, does an excellent job of this, because she might have terrible conversations with really stubborn individuals, but the amount of views that she gets and the audience interaction that she gets, I think there's a lot of power in that. And I guess she does that on a kind of bigger scale, but I think, small YouTube channels or even gamers who like live stream their gaming and they might be having a conversation about this in the background. I think there's just so many ways that it can happen. And I wonder if perhaps, it is kind of happening, but maybe not as in front of your face because it's just not in cube form.
Yeah. I think finding your zone of brilliance is definitely, at least from what I've seen, seems to be happening more. I think people are finding what type of activism fits their skill set well.
Yeah, play to your strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that zone of brilliance.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm taking that. It's really good.
And absolutely, like play to your strengths. Zone of brilliance. I really need to put that into my internal dictionary.
Yeah, it's one of the best I've heard.
Yeah.
That actually, I've got to give a shout out to my friend June in Bali. That came from him.
That's a great one. What was I going to say as well? I think, and certainly myself, and I wonder if many others have also started to, I guess, have a level of skepticism for the power, the impact for one-on-one outreach style, and being more aware of how much actual change happens on a bigger scale through like policy change and law reform. That's certainly, I think, a big part of why I've backed off street activism as well. I think there's a greater sense of, I guess, efficiency or input versus output. Yeah. If you can sign off on this campaign, or there's a petition that's passing through Parliament, some kind of a motion that means that this topic is going to be discussed by actual decision makers who actually have the power to pass something that is going to show up as an actual change of the legal status of something, or what may be permissible or not. And I think it seems like that's a very smart way of also redirecting energy. And we're so lucky that we have an animal justice party here in Australia. But I don't think it only has to happen through like parties that prioritize animals. It can be in the form of, like, I know, for example, I don't recall the specifics, but it was Wayne
in the US.
Yeah. With direct action, right? Wasn't there something that got overturned, or the judge and the jurors decided that he shouldn't have some kind of extreme punishment because they actually could understand, they fathomed his speech where he was really trying to appeal to their empathy and about, the whole concept of we should have the right to challenge unjust laws. And I think he got quite an empathic response.
He was facing, I think, 10 years, in jail.
Yeah.
Because of what he'd done.
Yeah. Which was, for anyone who doesn't know the case, it was just taking
taking,
chickens?
I think it was chickens out.
Yeah, abused chickens from a factory farm.
And basically rescued. So he was talking about the right to rescue.
Yes.
And so he got them out, but then he got charged. And he was faced with 10 years. And you just think, Well, I was just reading a news article only yesterday about this human monster who did horrible things to young girls, and he's going to get 3 years in jail. And they want to throw activists in jail for 10 years just for exposing what is going on. So I think he's an incredibly good speaker and he's an incredibly good lawyer. And I think his impassioned speech actually hit home. Yeah. And they threw the case out, which was amazing.
Wow.
It was just so cool. So,
I didn't know about that.
Oh,
I know of Wayne, but I didn't know about this actual case.
Yeah, the case got thrown out.
Wow.
So, because remember when he appeared at Forum?
Yeah.
Were you in the room when he was? Oh,
no.
Okay. So he was just about to go to court, and his court case was in just a few days, and he was talking about the impact it was going to have on his life. He has his dog, and he was facing 10 years in jail, and it was really quite an emotional talk. It was quite amazing. I wish we had been able to video it, because it would have shown a lot of people just the brilliance of the man and what he was facing, and you could see the emotion in his eyes and his speaking, but he was still strong and he still laid out his points, and you just thought, if anyone's going to get off this, it's going to be him. Yeah. And of course, we found out a couple of weeks later it was thrown out. So it was a great result.
And I would only imagine that part of the impactfulness of his statement there would be because he was able to convey the injustice against the actual victims, and that must have resonated to the judge and the jurors. But
I think this also, for young activists who may be listening into what we're talking about, these are the people we need to start looking at to model ourselves on. So, for young activists, look up to people like Wayne, look up to people like Earthly Ed. And they're not trying to be famous because of animal rights activism. They're trying to make a change. They're trying to make the world listen. And so, again, I don't want people to be cutting people down going, oh, they just in it for the money. They're not in it for the money. They're not making money out of it. They're just being amazing activists and exposing stuff like Joey Carbstrong, Chris Delforce. All those people are just exposing it and putting themselves in danger to show the world what's going on.
Yeah. I think this brings us really nicely to the final question, which is what are some misconceptions about animal rights activists that you'd like to address? Because I think we've already touched on that we might be seen as, breaking the law or having a big ego or
Never
I don't know what else, being righteous.
Bleeding hearts.
Yeah, all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of those misconceptions maybe less of a like, for example, the whole, we're just ultra sensitive and, overly empathic, and the bleeding hearts kind of comment that's supposed to be an insult. I think we should really take that as a point of pride, because living in a world that is just so apathetic and uncaring, I don't see that as an insult. So maybe to a point it could be a misconception, but I think for many of us, maybe that is actually kind of an accurate.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting is, people will say, oh, vegans, you're weak.
Yeah.
But seriously, we stand up against opposition every single day. Yeah. We would actually be the strongest people on the planet because of what we cop day in, day out.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it takes such a deep sense of integrity to even not doing activism, just to live vegan kind of just in your own world takes, deep conviction and integrity and kind of sticking it to the man in the system, like you're really, opposing them just through our lifestyle. And that itself is, I think, very threatening for some people.
Yeah, particularly when we're talking about an industry that has huge financial backing. So we're not just trying to change individual people's eating habits or, perception of animals, but we're also trying to
overthrow the system.
Yeah, and there's so much going on behind the scenes, which makes it feel impossible sometimes, but we can all only do so much.
I think the other misconception, this is probably the one that I get the most, is that we're just jobless, that
Yes.
we're dull bludgeons, that we've got nothing better to do. Like, oh, do you know how badly I'd love to be at the beach right now when I'm showing up for this?
I always like it on like if you on the Gold Coast there was a Magic Millions. It was always on a Saturday.
Yeah.
And you would always get the idiots who'd come past and go, get a job. And it'd be like, hang on, it's a Saturday.
Yes.
You're going to the races to throw your money away,
Yeah.
get horribly drunk, but you're telling us to get a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a joke, isn't it?
We used to have that in Townsville as well. We would protest live export. The council would often have like breakfast meetings and we'd stand out the front and people would say, you know, why aren't you at work? Get a job. We're like, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. I am going to work after this.
Again, no critical thinking.
Yeah.
It's just like they see you, they're threatened, they have to throw anything out at you to try and,
No, it's
you down.
crazy. But I think also one of the misconceptions I know is they always think animal rights activists, and we touched on it before, are always breaking the law. Now, there are some laws that are unjust and that they need to be broken to expose the truth. But we're not always out there breaking the law. We're trying to have conversations. We're trying to show the world that there is a difference between right and wrong.
Protests are legal in this country.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and you're allowed to get out there and you're allowed to have your say. Do it responsibly and don't do it violently because, of course, veganism is a movement for peace. I mean, it's the ultimate movement for peace. So we should all be just supporting peace for all existing living species.
Yep. Well put.
Is there anything?
Simple as that, really.
Yeah, I think that's my little soapbox done for today.
Yeah. Well, it's been an amazing conversation. I think it's there's going to be lots of little pieces that people can take away and implement. Hopefully, activists just feel more seen as well. You're not alone in feeling burnt out or frustrated. We're all there with you.
But I think we've touched on quite a few things here today. But personally, I think we could have been talking for ages. So maybe we can get you back in again sometime in the future and do a part 2.
Sure.
Yeah, because you've got such great insight into what's going on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just feel like, I mean, psychology is at the heart of like everything, right? Like when it comes to perspective, motivation, behavior. So there's there's infinite amounts that can be unpacked here.
Yeah, and what we'll do is the references you gave, we'll put them in the show notes.
Great.
So people can then go and have a look. We'll talk about maybe doing some sort of workshop later down the track about mental activism and, you know, getting ourselves back in shape.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for being with us. We love having you on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to finally see this coming to fruition because, Rick, you first mentioned it back in May at that other workshop. It's one of those things where it's just like this vague idea in the back of someone's mind and it never comes to life.
Yeah.
But hey, you guys did it.
We're
pat on the back for you.
I'm going to say we were naive. I don't think we thought it would take us this long to launch it.
Yeah.
But you see, there's like all the background stuff of making sure you've got all the equipment that's going to work properly and who are we going to ask? And there's so much background work into doing a podcast that I don't think people realise.
Yeah. Oh, good on you for committing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So this is us signing off for this one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
See you next time.
Yeah. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Vegan Compass podcast, unveiling truths, inspiring change.
Be sure to follow us on social media at @thevegancompass_podcast. See you next time.